When you need to work quickly and confidently, you need Grammarly. It's a trusted AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with better writing. And it works where you work, across 500,000 apps and websites. 96% of users agree. Grammarly helps them craft more impactful writing. Sign up and download for free at Grammarly.com/podcast. That's Grammarly.com/podcast. Grammarly. Easier said, done.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, this is a topic that I've been wanting to get into on this program for a long time. It's just a matter of trying to find the right entry point, because everybody's met that person. They get super passionate about something that's really, really important, and they blast you with the passion. And you're like, okay, that's just, I don't want to do that with this because it's way too important. And yes, this is West Virginia we're going to talk about, but this has applicable principles and problems that will go to any state you want to find anywhere. Kelly Caseman's with me. She's from Think Kids, West Virginia. We're going to talk about the CPS system in West Virginia, a big problem for a long time. Kelly, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, one of our core principles on this program is things don't happen in a vacuum, they happen in a sequence. How do we get below the noise in the headlines and find out what's going on? CPS, DHHR, which runs CPS in the state of West Virginia. This is not a one headline, three headline, 1 year. This is decades of bad management, of unaccountability, of not having transparency. There's bureaucratic problems, there's legal problems. This has been a mess for a very long time. We need to frame this as that first and not just go trying to fix one problem at a time, don't we?
We do. We in many ways should have seen this coming. We're a state with high poverty. We're a state with, high prevalence of diseases of despair. And then we had the opioid epidemic unfold. And when that happened, we saw just a surge of kids entering Child Protective Services, or CPS. And we didn't respond quickly, and we still are kind of chasing our tails, trying to find a way to address the number of kids who are in unsafe situations. And it has exploded. And, for the last couple of years, our state legislature has attempted to respond to it, but it's been very piecemeal. It's been with very specific small legislation that's not going to get us where we need to go.
Yeah, and anecdotally, I remember being home a couple of years ago for a funeral, and I was sitting with somebody I grew up with who's now a judge in, southern West Virginia, and he just looked at me and went, first case is the dad and drugs, the next case is the mom and the drugs, and then the third case is what do I do with the kids? And he just looks at you like, what am I supposed to do? We're going to do a lot of beating up on the system here, and it deserves some beating up on, but there's a lot of people in the system. The system's made up of people. There's a lot of people trying to do their best. There's a lot of people that aren't doing their jobs right. How do we humanize things like the system, the state, CPS? That's just a big faceless bureaucracy, right? We have a human problem here, right? Where we just don't humanize this enough and get to it on that level. Is that a fair way to put this?
I completely agree. I think that the way this narrative has unfolded in the public discourse has been very much on the system and not on the families. And I think that is primarily because there are certain reasons why you don't share the traumatic experiences that kids have, right? So a number of people who don't work in these systems don't really understand what's going on with these kids. And so when you have like a story that kind of has brought it to the prominence now of a couple of kids who were found living in a and essentially in a barn with no running water, no bathroom, deprived of basic necessities, people start to get a taste of what's really kind of the extreme of what's going on here. And then because of confidentiality, you don't interview the kids, you don't speak to the kids. And then the focus really goes on broken systems, which what we're talking about today is child protective services. But we're seeing, because of the drug epidemic, we're seeing a lot of broken systems: public education, healthcare, juvenile justice system, and as you just referenced, the court system. And so instead of us looking at the people who are trying to do this work on the ground level, we're not interviewing them. We're not talking to them. The system doesn't want their CPS workers doing interviews, for example. So it's very hard to articulate on the ground level what needs to happen to ensure that these kids are safe. And so the system itself is very self-protective. And I think that's probably the first step that needs to happen, is instead of us saying, well, shrugging and saying the system is doing its best, there's nothing we can do about the prevalence of addiction, we need to be saying what we're doing isn't working. And so we need to pivot and look at a better strategic plan.
Yeah, Kelly Caseman, thank kids joining us. Here, you just mentioned it, the feeders to the system is something that we can address pretty easily, because most people have had some kind of contact with those feeders. You can't use a judicial system to fix the education system, but that's what happens because we're not dealing with the educational issues. The legislature can't fix parenting, although it likes to think it can, and they run on that, but they really can't. The feeder problems, you just mentioned it, traumatized kids do traumatized things. You have an opioid epidemic. Well, if you traumatize a bunch of kids, you've increased their chances of having opioid epidemic. You've increased their chances of winding up in the judicial system. How do we deal about the feeders to the system, the broken homes, things like that? Because you can't just say the system, because you've got these stats and we've been looking at them. The CPS is chronically understaffed. They're chronically underpaid. It's a really, really hard job for the caseworker level. The feeder system is where this needs to be attacked, but that's the thing that people seem to want to deal with the least, because that's the messy end of this.
I completely agree. I think that we have narrowed our focus too closely on the systems. If you focus on the system too much, all you're going to do is create a bigger system. So we need more CPS workers, but more importantly, we need to find ways to keep kids and families from being introduced to these systems in the first place. So you want to keep these kids out of the courts. You want to keep them out of CPS. You want to keep them out of foster care. And so we really need to be focusing on prevention. We need to be focusing on parent engagement on that local level. I think that you would agree. You grew up, you're born and raised West Virginia, as am I. And there was a time when when I was growing up that communities were more tightly engaged. So, I always say when I got in trouble in town, by the time I got home, somebody had called my parents and told them what I was up to. Now we have kids who are incredibly isolated. And I think that one of the things that we need to do, particularly with opioid settlement funding, is to funnel that money and ensure that it makes it to the community level and is specific for kids. So they have that one trusted adult that they can talk to. I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, Kelly Caseman joining us. You mentioned the school system. We now have problems with abuse in the school system, though. We have this terrible story of the teacher duct taping children. Look, my mom was a special educator. Both my parents were career educators in West Virginia, retired teachers. My mom was a special educator starting in the late 60s. They were the pioneers of this stuff, the stuff they had to go through just to get a classroom space. The education system is supposed to be the safe place for children, especially children coming from bad homes. That's supposed to be where they can get a decent meal and some attention and some love and whatever. But we can't even get that part of the right. So much of the reporting system is supposed to go through the education system because they see those kids more than just about anybody else, especially school-age children. The education component and their relationship with the CPS system, that's a broken relationship on a couple levels, and that's a force multiplier to the bad in this, both the CPS system and the education system, isn't it?
It is. You know, a couple of years ago, we held a focus group with school staff, school-based health center staff, and CPS workers, and it was clear to me, and this was just in one county, and as you know, in West Virginia, everything really happens on the county level when it comes to public education. And so we were trying to find a way to better communicate between CPS and school staff and the healthcare staff. And there was a lot of animosity there. One of the recommendations we make at Think Kids to try and address child maltreatment is that we really need, on the governor's level, a cabinet staffer who oversees develops a strategic plan and oversees child maltreatment. So there can be someone overseeing all these systems and can force collaboration. And so this animosity between CPS and school staff on the local level, somebody has to say, enough. You have to collaborate for the sake of the kids. And when that doesn't happen, you'll hear many teachers say, I called CPS repeatedly and no one ever gets back to me. And that should be unacceptable. That is a problem that we've seen bubbling up for many years now, and that definitely needs addressed.
And let's be honest here, the reason there's animosity is because those systems feel like they're fighting over funding. So it becomes a funding and a bureaucratic fight instead of, hey, if the education system's broken, that makes the CPS system worse. And if the CPS system's broken, that makes the education system worse. How do we have that conversation? Because when you're talking policy and trying to get the people focused back into policy, which is a lot of the core issue with something like CPS, it just always goes to funding instead of, hey, preventative funding is always cheaper than fix it later funding. And if they're not working together and fighting over the funding on the front end, these kids have no chance. The teachers have no chance. The CPS workers have no chance. That's the conversation we really need to be having, because that's a practical, fixable thing that you could fix legislatively or with regulatory action. But we don't get to that conversation because everybody's fighting over the money, right? That's just the honest truth.
I completely agree with you. I think that that's one of the reasons we need somebody in the governor's cabinet, because we have a finite amount of resources in this state. And we have all of these systems vying for funding when they go to the state legislature. So almost every year, whether it be kinship care, foster care, CPS, their leadership goes to the legislature and says, we're trying, here are our problems, and it can be fixed with more money. We just don't have enough money to give to every system. What they need to be doing is collaborating and pooling their resources together. Let me give you an example. So we have given, the legislature has allocated more and more funding to schools for counselors, for psychologists. Very important, but you and I both know that enrollment is down in our schools in West Virginia because we're losing population, particularly younger people. And as that money goes, as the population goes down, money goes down, and then the first to go are those support staffers. And so it makes much more sense to have a state school policy to ensure that there are referrals to the healthcare system if a child needs help. Every child should have an annual well child exam, and that is a perfect place to, when the child is examined, to see if there are, signs of abuse. But a number of our kids aren't even making it to annual well child exams. And so there are plenty of ways that our systems could be collaborating that would make the funding more effective. But they have to be collaborating in order for that to happen. And that's not happening, to the degree we need in this state.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply. At Baker's Pharmacy, care is what's most convenient for you. Care is being here when you need us. We're open evenings and weekends. Care is helping you save more. Most insurance plans and discount cards are accepted at your local Baker's Pharmacy. Care is saving you time by managing your prescriptions online. You can request refills, check order status, and more. Care is convenience that works for everyone. Baker's, a world of care is in store. Services and availability vary by location. Age and other restrictions may apply. For coverage, consult your health insurance company. Visit the pharmacy or our site for details.
Yeah, Kelly Caseman joining us, thinkkidswestvirginia.org. She also wrote an op-ed that we're going to link to in the Substack notes. Make sure you read that whole piece. One thing you're talking about there is, and what's missing on some of this, and you've been talking about this in social media and your writing, is there's a big accountability problem here, because we know the hard way money alone doesn't fix it, doesn't fix education, doesn't fix poverty, doesn't fix CPS, because you got to have accountability where the money goes and did it get used for what it was supposed to get used for. The DHHR, and I know it's getting to change now because it's getting to, we're going to make it a 3-headed monster instead of 1-headed monster. We'll see if that makes any difference. But there has been an accountability issue for a long, long time, not just on, well, we have privacy of the kids. We get that, how the upper ups do things, how the supervision's done things, how the case management is done. You've had good case managers just throw up their hands like, I just can't do my job effectively, and you can't get good people into those jobs like you really need them. There's a huge accountability. People, we need to understand, CPS, we don't think of it like the DMV, but this is the DMV, except it's in charge of kids' health care. It's still a bureaucracy. We have to have some accountability here, and that's a huge problem.
Yeah, it's a problem on a number of levels. So as I'm sure you know, we have a relationship with the Department of Justice that in 2015, they wrote a letter to then Governor Tomlin saying that we were non-compliant with the ADA because we had too many kids going out of state to access mental health services. That was directly correlated with CPS. And so we have that case that is still ongoing. We have a class action lawsuit of kids who have aged out of the foster care system. And so there are many things at play that make our state system less willing to share that data that we need to be transparent, to make it more of a collaborative effort to ensure that these kids aren't falling through, the gaping holes in our safety net.
What are the holes in the safety net? Because I say that all the time too. It's like, well, kids fall through the cracks. Well, the cracks aren't artificial cracks. They're things that didn't get taken care of that should have gotten done. So what are the cracks? Because people, again, they'll just go, well, funding and there's not enough workers. Okay, we all know that. What are the other problems, though, besides just the communication and the lack of services? Why doesn't Calhoun County have certain services that Berkeley County has or Kanawha County has and Gilmer doesn't? There's a lot of levels to those cracks, and they're not all the same for all 55 counties or for the whole state or, for that matter, for the whole country, are they?
No, I think one of the biggest problems that we have in the state is that we know that there are gaps in the safety net, and we have not spent time trying to find where those gaps are and prioritize them. So some counties, Fayette County, for example, has a variety of different services, preventive services, for example, that are crucial to keeping kids from being introduced to the CPS system in the first place, while other counties don't have them. We're one of those states that really prizes local autonomy. And so data collection is so much easier now, and we really should be looking at collecting data, making it more transparent as to where these gaps are, and then addressing them. And that goes back to, like I said, a state strategic plan. You've got to have all of the key players at the table, and you have to force collaboration. And instead of us trying to look at this problem as a one and done legislative session where a couple of laws are passed, you have to look at it as it being a comprehensive problem that's going to take years to fix. And so, there's a foster care dashboard here in West Virginia where you can see the vacancies in the CPS system. But you also have to look at high turnover in those roles, and how much training. Are we compromising on the training of staff just to get warm bodies, in those places? And so there's a lot that we could be doing collectively to address some of these issues with CPS. But the first thing that has to happen is that our state health department needs to be more transparent. And we need to collectively agree that what we're doing as a state isn't working.
Yeah, Kelly Caseman joining us. One of the tropes, of course, is, and you just mentioned it, was people from the outside will go, well, of course it's West Virginia. It's the poverty or it's the opioid crisis. Okay, we know there's a poverty problem in West Virginia. We noticed. We know there's an opioid. You just mentioned Fayette County. I went to church in Fayette County growing up. I know that area far too well. I know the problems in Fayette County. What you're speaking of, though, go to Berkeley County, which was in the news last week, in the legislature, for that matter. The backlog of cases in Berkeley County, this is the second largest county in the state. It's one of the more affluent ones. This is the DC exurbs, Martinsburg area, for people that aren't familiar. This is not Southern West Virginia coal fields, Christmas and Appalachia stuff. This is where they had to put in zoning laws to not grow so fast because they had double-digit growth. And they can't get this right. What does that say about the whole of state approach? You're saying is like, yeah, sure, Fayette County's having problems. McDowell County's having problems, the classic coalfield counties. But Berkeley County, that's supposed to be the superstar future of the state. They can't get this right either. And you have this judge testifying in front of the legislator like, we can't get this right, begging for help. If you actually listen to how he was saying it, and I appreciated him doing that, that shows you how deep and how broad the issue is to me.
Berkeley, one of the challenges they have, of course, is that people can make more money if they go to any of the states around, the Eastern Panhandle. But, a point I want to make, a few years ago, we've done a number of policy roundtables over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, if you look at the National Child Abuse and Neglect Data System numbers for, say, 2011 to 2015, we weren't number one for child maltreatment. We didn't have the highest rate of child victims. We didn't have the highest rate of first-time victims. That really has happened as the opioid crisis has unfolded. And so I think that we need to look at it in the context of this goes hand in hand with the drug crisis. And I think that we need to look at the opioid settlement funding on that community level and see how we can plug that funding in to address some of these issues. But back to the point of funding, I really worry that this kind of drumbeat for more funding, and that when there's no accountability, it is just going to be throwing funding at the wall to see what sticks when you don't have a plan in place. And that is the biggest problem that we have, is we're not collectively working for a plan and then to look at the evaluation. So we're not coming at this with real strategy. We're kind of coming at this with throwing our hands in the air and saying, this is unwinnable unless we get more money. The money's not coming other than the opioid settlement funding. So where do we go from there?
Kelly Caseman, you brought up the opioid. I've done media for the last few years since I've been publicly writing and doing media stuff. And I always bring up when people talk about the opioid crisis, like, yeah, the opioid crisis is terrible, but it also revealed a lot of cracks that were already there. You know, West Virginia state government has not been super functional for pretty much ever, frankly. The opioid crisis revealed problems that were already there with poverty, with the declining demographics, with the state government, with the allocation of services, with, you know, some of the generational trauma in West Virginia, especially places like the coal fields. How do we talk about that part of it as well? Because when you wrote your piece in West Virginia Watch, I subscribe, you should too. They do excellent work. I'm just looking at the stats you lay out here with this CPS state. West Virginia has the longest response time anyone in the country, 3 times the national average. Highest rate of children who receive an investigative or alternative response, 3 times the national average. Highest rate of child victims in the country at 17 per 1,000 children, which is twice the national. And then you ask the questions, this is all Googleable. Why didn't anybody know it? Well, because we're numb to statistics, right?
Right.
Put the personal face on that compared to what we were just talking about. Because if you're going to have a leadership approach and a people approach, it can't just be the stats, because people's eyes just roll in the back of their heads, millions of dollars, billions of dollars, thousands of kids. How do you put a face on that stat to get back that empathy you were writing about in your piece that we've lost because it just kind of goes over our heads and we just don't hear it anymore?
So I think one of the important things that we need to be doing is having community meetings and then allow people to come up and share their stories, because we don't, unless it's this egregious story like, you know, the Browning story, you know, kind of these egregious stories that make national headlines. People don't know what's going on. Let me give you an example that I had referenced before. You know, we've held these roundtables around the state, and probably about 7 years ago, 5 to 7 years ago, we had a principal from Boone County who came up to the microphone and in tears and said, you know, she was an elementary school principal, and she said, we're having kids who are coming into our school, starting kindergarten, who are not potty trained and are nonverbal. So she said, we don't have the services for them, and we're probably going to pass them on to first grade because we know that there's a handful of kids who are going to be coming in behind them. And she was begging for help. You know, that is powerful. That's the sort of thing that we need to hear as a community to force change on the state level. But those stories really stay squelched for a variety of reasons. I've heard from a number of people who have interacted with CPS who are afraid to share their stories publicly because they're afraid of retaliation from the system. So I think that that's one of the first things that we need to keep in check, and that is retaliation from the systems that are, you know, concerned of people knowing too many of these terrible stories. But if we don't get these stories out, you know, we have to have the community, you know, kind of the public will to force change. And so it's not in our best interest to keep these stories quiet. We need to ensure that they're being shared on the community and state level.
Yeah, Kelly Caseman joining us. Her piece is at West Virginia Watch. We're going to link to it. Make sure you read the entire piece. Also got a couple links in there, like the maltreatment report for 2021. You'll want to read those stats for yourself. You hit on your piece when you were writing about this, and I think this is the really important thing is you have to have a mixture of empathy. We're already really good at outrage, especially in the social media age, right? Like we can put something real hot and heavy on top of that retweet or that Facebook post about how awful something is. We do outrage really good. We don't do really good about channeling outrage and empathy to actually getting things done. You mentioned having like meetings and things like that. Obviously, you're in the policy world, so you do some things that maybe the average person can't. Social media is an amazing tool, though, and we don't use that for this. And it's not just showing those horror stories like the shed story, and now we have the pictures that just came out this morning of what that shed looked like. You can share that stuff, but you can also share like, hey, we're going to have this piece of legislation moving. Hey, we have this committee hearing. That's boring stuff, but if people can put it on their social media, that's an accessible piece of policy and advocacy that people can do, not just sharing that stuff that's sensationalized, but sharing the stuff that matters, like, hey, here's this funding bill that's coming up. Hey, here's this CPS. Here's a good idea. How about a CPS worker that did a great job? We could maybe praise some of them. That'd probably do some good. Give us some stuff like that, just practical, that folks can just do, even just from their phone, that might make a bit of a difference here.
Oh, wow. Gosh, they can do a number of things. I think that they can pressure, and this could be in letters, definitely social media, pressure governor to create a cabinet role for, an office of child health. And then you can pressure all of your state systems, again, your healthcare system, talk to your pediatrician, your public ed, talk to your local superintendent, your local principal, your teachers, talk to CPS and foster care if you're connected with them, your court system, talk to your local judges and say, we've had enough. We have a problem with child maltreatment and more needs to be done. I think that what we have right now is almost a shell game of people and, policymakers not wanting to say that they have a responsibility to address this issue. We all have a responsibility to address this issue. So they can hold these people to the, feet to the fire and say, what are you doing? How are you addressing it on a local level? How are you addressing it on the state level? And then instead of just blaming the systems, which you're exactly right, there are good people in it, but the systems are very slow and not reactive, to forcing at least a collective agreement that we as a state do not accept the rate of child maltreatment. We don't want to be known as, the highest rate of child abuse in the country. And then force at least a public dialogue. I think that's really where we need to start. People don't have to become really savvy on policy issues. What they need to do is channel that anger to force people who are in the high places to respond and say, we will do something. We're certainly going to do more than what we're willing to do right now.
Yeah, Kelly Caseman joining us. There's a lot of layers to this that we could get into, but there's two that I want to highlight, not just policy-wise, but just kind of human interest-wise. We've got all the data in the world now. Two things that we have to address beyond just the school system, and let's be honest, policy-wise, a lot of people just think the schools are going to fix everything and they pop out an 18-year-old fully functional adult. That's not how that works, right? Wellness and mental health for adolescents, those two things together, both their physical welfare, things like nutrition, healthcare, things like that. And we can have a debate about how you do healthcare and things like that. We can have a debate over school lunches and things like this. That healthcare and mental health component, when you're talking about the opioid crisis, when you're talking about child poverty, when you start talking about traumatized kids, there's no way you're going to fix these problems unless you have a mental health care component to supplement what the school system and CPS or whoever else is trying to do anything. If we don't do something about adolescent mental health care, we're just going to kind of be throwing stuff up into the wind here. That's how I feel about it. I've had some experience with this. There's just not enough of it to go around. It's a rising problem, especially since the COVID, where we decided we're just going to traumatize. Good, bad, or indifferent. Maybe we had to do some of it, but we traumatized a generation of kids. We just did. That's just the facts. Right. Unless we do something with the mental health care component to go alongside and integrate it with education and these other programs, we're setting ourselves up for failure, I feel like.
I couldn't agree with you more. We at Think Kids have been working on this. It's not just a West Virginia problem. The lack of mental health care for the pediatric population, particularly adolescents, is a national problem. It's certainly one here in West Virginia. And again, we're not coming at it in a very strategic way. So there are places where public ed is working with the healthcare system, but we know that there are mental health care facilities in the state. We know that there's been an escalation of adolescents who have shown up in our emergency rooms over the past couple of years in mental health crises, and we don't have no place to send them. And so we really need to get better at assessing where the services are and if they're accessible. I mean, even if a mental health care facility has a bed available, if a child needs it, but it's 50 miles away and the family lacks transportation, how do you get the child there? How do you ensure that the parents can visit the child? So we know that there are gaps in that safety net. We don't know what they are. And we should be having more conversations about this lack. We should be talking about the assessing services. We should be looking at full continuum of care. And then we should be prioritizing and addressing them collectively, not just the system, but communities as well. Because, I'll go back to Fayette County. Different counties have different priorities, and some counties really do prioritize. They recognize that our communities have deteriorated because of the drug epidemic, and they've tried to respond. And they've got some really good things going on, like the ICE model. I don't know if you know about that, but it's. If that can be replicated, but the problem is we're not having these dialogues of what's working on that community level so they can be replicated in places around the state.
Yeah. And there's different ways to do it too. You mentioned Fayette County's done this. Nicholas County did this about a year ago. They started trying to integrate drug rehab and the CPS system with the probationary system. And the idea was, well, you put your family back as part of your probationary system and as part of getting your rehab done. And it's very small numbers. I think they had like 4, 5, 6 people graduate the program. But when you got, Somerville's 2,000 people, 5, 6 families, that's an impactful thing. So there's different things to do it, but there's got to be a will. And the biggest problem I've seen, I'm in my early 40s now, there's not a lot of consistency on these. You get a good program and it does okay for a year or two or a cycle 2 or a funding cycle, usually is what ends up happening legislatively. How do we get consistency? I know this all goes back to leadership, whether it's political leadership, community leadership, but consistency is so important on all of these matters, because when you're dealing with traumatized people with addiction issues, traumatized kids, the education system, that's a big problem. We don't have any consistency.
You're right. So a number of these programs that pop up for better or worse around the state are grant funded. And you don't see any evaluation data from them. And then the good ones, the bad ones, they fade away. And so I think we should, one of the first steps we need to take is to ensure any program that's funded by the state, that there's transparency and their evaluation data is shared online. And if a program isn't successful, then it shouldn't continue to be funded, and successful programs should receive some seed funding to ensure that they are sustained and replicated. And that is one of the big problems. Again, it goes back to leadership. We have to ensure that our systems aren't self-protective and are more focused on the kids and their needs. And so you do hear about great programs. Nobody's assessing them. Nobody knows why they fade away, and more of that data needs to be shared.
Yeah, Kelly Caseman joining us. You ended your piece with something that I think is important. We are in an election season, which seems to be constant anymore. But you said every politician on the campaign trail should be asked, what are you going to do about child abuse and neglect victims? CPS is a government program. That means our elected leaders are in charge of it, the legislator, the governor, whoever they appoint to do certain things. I think that's just the core truth of this, though, is elected leaders, they got a lot on their plate. This is one of those things they want to fix enough to just get it out of the way so that they don't have to deal with it. And I'm not even being mean about it. That's just the nature of the beast. This is something that we the people, the normal folks, the non-elected folks, this is something we're just going to have to try to make noise on. And that's the only way you're really going to get to see any movement, isn't it?
I agree. It's really unfortunate but true that almost everybody running for elected office will use kids as a prop, right? So they say, I care about the kids, I'm going to do something. But once they get into office and they see just how complex and how difficult it can be, getting stonewalled by systems, they give up. I've had legislators say to me before, I don't want to talk about foster care this year. I don't want to talk about CPS this year. We talked about it last year. We can't talk about it every year. Of course, you need to talk about it every year until the problem is fixed. You should be required to talk about it every year. And so we really do need more people, like I said, holding their feet to the fire. People do need to be taking to their social media and talking more about this, making an issue so it doesn't just bubble up every few years, and people just seem surprised that it's happening. If you do a Google search of West Virginia kids on a daily basis, you see that this isn't an issue that happens once every few years. It's happening weekly. And so, if that angers you, which it should anger everyone, don't just get mad about it, do something about it.
Yeah. Kelly Caseman joining us. We're going to link to her think piece. I'm also going to link to those news reports we talked about. That'll all be in the Substack notes, hertel.substack.com. It'll also be on our social media. You just said it, so let folks know where they can follow and keep up with you. Let them know what Think West Virginia kids and others are doing about this thing. Let folks know where they can keep up with you until we get you back on the program again, because we're going to keep talking about this very important issue, because I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon.
So our website is thinkkidswv.org. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and we have a monthly newsletter, and we recap all news articles around kids and kids' health in West Virginia in it. And I highly recommend that you subscribe to that newsletter, and then you can get a really good picture of what's going on with kids' health around the state.
Be important too as we get ready to go do another legislative session too. They'll be updating on that thing. They also have other stuff on there like child hunger, mental health, things like this. There's a great piece in there about grandparents taking care of kids. We didn't have time to get into that, but it's a very important issue. Kelly Caseman, thank you so much for the time today. Really appreciate it, ma'am.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yes, ma'am.
All the music on Hertel is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la máquina.
What makes for a great vacation? Depends on who you ask. Are you looking to get away or bring everyone together? Do you want to get outside and play or see a play at the plate? Fortunately, however you operate, I'm the destination you've been looking for. The name's Missouri, but you can call me Mo. And I have just one question. What's your MO? Come see me at visitmo.com.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Folks, if you've listened to the Hertel program, you've heard our friend Gabriella Hoffman, but you need to make sure you're checking out her podcast, District of Conservation. It's a podcast exploring the nuances of true conservation efforts from D.C. and beyond. From topic discussions to exclusive interviews with conservation and energy newsmakers, Gabriella keeps listeners appraised of the latest news stories while elevating important voices. Listen to District of Conservation on Apple Podcasts or wherever podcasts are played.
Religion is at the intersection of our 21st century life, even if we don't express a faith. At a time when it seems that religion isn't as prevalent as it once was, it still leaves its mark everywhere. As a pastor, I know that religion isn't something I just do on a Sunday, but it's found in every nook and cranny of my life. Sexuality, politics, social media, the economy, war, nationalism, all have some kind of religious angle to them. And as a communicator, I want to find the stories that can help people understand this part of our society that is so important to so many. Hi, I'm Dennis Sanders, and I'm the host of Church and Main. Church and Main is a podcast about the journey of faith and where it intersects with modern life. I look at faith with a journalist's eye, asking the who, where, what, why, and how religion affects some of the major issues of the day. Join me as we journey together. You can listen to Church and Main podcast at the website churchandmain.org or on your favorite podcast app. I look forward to seeing you.